Cool. Well, I think we'll get started. It's 3 o'clock. And I think everybody we're expecting to be here is here. So we'll jump straight into the meeting. So through the formalities, do you have any apologies for absence? Chair of the Business Board. I don't think there are any others. Do you have any declarations of interest? I don't think so. Are you expecting any other? No. Before I pass over to Tom, I suppose technically welcome Lisa to your first formal TVCA cabinet. So thanks for joining us and welcome. And therefore I'll pass over to Tom for item 3.
Thanks, Ben. So I'll just say a few words and then I'll pass across to Gary to pick up the detail. I think the first thing to say is we absolutely recognise the significance of this letter, and we fully accept the recommendations and the other action points that they make in the letter. There's probably two sides in terms of the response. Firstly, we clearly need to address the short-term issues and make sure that we're doing everything we need to do now to address the immediate issues, which we've already taken steps to do, which Gary will pick up in a minute. But equally important for me is making sure that this doesn't happen again, and that we put in place the necessary arrangements to make sure that we've got a sustainable and high-performing finance function going forwards. So I guess there's two elements to our response. Firstly, dealing with what we need to do now, but secondly, making sure, as I say, that we address some of the wider issues and make sure as part of this organisational reset and linking into the best value plan that we deal with what we need to do and make sure that we've got that finance function right going forward. So pass across to Gary. Do you want to take us through the detail, Gary?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So just to walk through the report, the first is the purpose of the report. So that's to seek acceptance of the recommendations under Section 24, Schedule 7.2 of the Local Audit and Accountability Act. That's following receipt of a letter from the authority's external auditors, Ernst & Young. We've summarised for members of the Cabinet the key 3 substantive recommendations at the beginning of the report, and then we go into more detail within the report itself and the appendices to the report as well. So that's in the table just at the front of the report, where we have the capacity of the team, the process for public inspection of accounts, and also the assurance processes around the 24-25 year-end timetable for the closure of those accounts as well. The key recommendations are set out, but I'll come back to those at the end if I may. I'll just go through each section for members. The first thing to note is the background to this, as the letter is stated at Appendix 1. EY, our auditors, were appointed as combined authority auditors as part of a national public sector auditor appointments process. They picked up from Mazars, the previous auditors, and that appointment commenced with effect from the 23-24 financial year, was their first financial year that they took responsibility for. And their first audit completion report covered several matters, of which one of those matters was in relation to capacity of the team, which management responded to as part of the Audit and Governance Committee process that considers those letters on behalf of the Cabinet. Within the body of the report, we set out the key elements extracted of the legislation at paragraph 3 in terms of the written recommendations that external auditors can make as part of that part of legislation, either pre or during an audit process, and that clearly states how they can do that. And then we've got a copy of the full letter at Appendix 1 to the paper as well. But what we've done for ease of reference is at paragraph 4 we set out what specifically those 3 recommendations were for members' details, which, just to recap, we recommend that this is EY, the auditors, recommend that the authority review the capacity within the finance team to ensure there's sufficient capacity to support the breadth of activities, including supporting internal and external audit work programmes to meet statutory reporting deadlines. So that's the first recommendation. The second is recommending that the authority reviews its processes around the public inspection of accounts period to ensure that it fully understands the statutory reporting requirements of the inspection period itself, and has arrangements in place to ensure those are satisfied. And then the third one is recommending the authority sets out a clear timetable off the back of that for production of 24-25 statement of accounts, including the annual governance statement, which supports the commencement of the public inspection period by the statutory deadline of the 1st of July 2025, and support the audited statements concluding no later than the 30th of November 2025. So that's the backdrop for the letter, the background for how that works in terms of legislation. That's set out in the first parts of the paper. And then what we've worked through for Cabinet members is the planning and quality assurance about what we come up with for each of those 3 recommendations, how we'll monitor that, We have a master action plan that we're tracking regularly with the auditors at Appendix 2, and we're having meetings with the auditors as we speak, and we're going through that regularly with them. In addition to that, we have specific analysis and work and review work we're commissioning with the capacity and capability of the finance team. So as Tom said, there's a short, medium and long-term goals set out in paragraphs 10 through to paragraph 12, where we set out the short term is absolutely we want to make sure that through a combination of interim resource and existing team resource and capacity that we hit the year-end timetables for this year, and we've given details there about how we intend to do that, including the appointment of interim resources, which we've already been securing as we speak. We've also set out the second stage order of medium-term work, which is to review and benchmark the finance team, both capacity and capability across other MCAs, like organisations, any benchmarking information that we can get from people like recruitment agencies and others. We're taking all that into account, and we're doing a comprehensive review of the team. But we've provided for members information, the baseline position of where we are as a team within the appendix to the report that you see at Appendix 3. We've given a bit of information on new starters. Obviously, since the time of writing the audit reports are at a point in time, recommendations are at a point in time, so we've given some context to that. And we've also set out in the long term, our view is to work towards benchmarked, comparable, high-performing finance function, going through that over the long term, consistently going forward. So those 3 short, medium and long term goals set out within that section of the paper and in the appendix. The second element was a review of the processes around public inspection period. So again, we've looked at the processes we've agreed with the auditors to plan for this year to the end of June, and with a view to having the public inspection period starting on the 1st of July. And that's for the 24-25 financial statements, including the narrative report, the annual governance statement as part of that process. And we've also set that out in Appendix 4 as the detail of how that works linked to legislation and how that process works, and agreed that with the auditors as well. The third element is the timetable for the production of the 24-25 statement of accounts, including the annual governance statement. So again, we've got a detailed year-end timetable. We've provided the summary of that in Appendix 5. And there's task-based level detail that we're working through with auditors as well from a week-to-week basis, and we have regular timetable meetings in with the auditors, which we've agreed with the audit partner and senior audit partner, and myself and Tom as Chief Executive met and spoken with the audit partners as well to gain assurance around that timetable and how that's intended to work, including the resource plan that we've got alongside that. What we've also done as part of this process is we've engaged with local authority colleagues around this plan in terms of how we're proposing to address this. I'm engaged with local authority finance directors as well in terms of their knowledge and expertise, which I'm grateful for in terms of the process of how we work this forward. But in addition to that, we've engaged with as part of the Best Value Notice, the Improvement Board leads as part of that as well, and the LGA, to get all possible inputs into this plan that we've produced that you've got in front of you today, and how that's intended to operate as part of the consultation process with the plan. We then set out as part of the conclusion how we intend to report back. So as well as the normal formal meetings you have of Cabinet, Audit and Governance Committee and the governance structures that we've got, we're proposing to send out briefing updates as well in between those time frames around key points within the year-end timetable, which covers end of May, end of June, end of September and end of November as the key points for both draft, unaudited accounts and audited accounts timeframes. And we'll also, I've agreed to keep up to date the local authorities, finance directors as part of that process, and also the TVCA Audit and Governance Committee. I've provided briefings to the chair of the TVCA Audit and Governance Committee as well throughout the process of building this report, and also to conclude and agree that the Audit and Governance Committee will track the formal processes as part of the accounts process as well, which is in line with our governance requirements as well. The final aspect I wanted to cover before opening up to questions is the external audit team have also confirmed for us, this is at paragraph 21, the process subject to us accepting the recommendations, which I'll come on to in a second. We were required to report that to the external auditors before publishing the formal response so that they can review that and then conclude that they're content with that, and then we would publish that online as part of our formal statutory response to that letter. So those are the key features of the report. The recommendations within the report, back to the top, if I may. The first recommendation is to note the content of the letter from Ernst & Young LLP included at Appendix 1. The second is to accept the 3 statutory recommendations, which we fully accept, around the actions detailed in the letter, and that includes the other actions and other ancillary information. So as well as the 3 formal recommendations they've given, there was also some other commentary that we've incorporated into the master plan as well. And in addition to that, we've set out a paragraph for the recommendations in full, so it's to accept those. Recommendation 3 is to approve the actions to be taken to address the 3 statutory recommendations and the other actions set out within the report and at the appendices 2 to 5. And recommendation 4 is to approve the proposed reporting arrangements, as I've just been through, identified in paragraph 19 of the report as well, with the relevant groups. So I'll probably pause, Chair, at that point and take any questions.
Just a basic one, Gary, about the capacity amount. I regularly sort of see you with different hats on the TVCA and that. Just in terms of the Development Corporation and what the increase in, of the 3 development corporations, and what the increase in capacity means for them. Are they going to have dedicated different officers, or is it going to be?
Yeah. So in terms of the development corporations as we stand, we've got some dedicated finance resource allocated within the team as capacity for those development corporations, but we're also, what I've committed to do is part of this review work that I'm doing over the medium term, because at the moment it's a point in time. We need to make sure we look at the future plans as well and make sure we're ahead of things in terms of any future capacity requirements for what we're proposing to do with the master plans for the development corporations going forward as well, so I'll factor that in with the medium term review work as well.
Brenda.
Thank you. So I'll just echo what Tom first said. It is a serious situation, but I think that listening to what the response is, it seems that there's a robust plan there to put things right. I'm glad to hear that you're working with the finance directors. I know I was keen to make sure that was happening, and I think that is a very positive way forward. But I also would just like to ask about the capacity. So that worries me because can you give us any kind of scenario or more explanation about why the capacity was a problem?
There's a couple of elements to that. The first they've touched on within the actual letter, EY, where they've talked about the last few years has been almost trying to deal with several financial years at once in terms of the audits because of the delays within the audit programme we've had both locally and nationally, and that's meant that they're trying to parallel run queries on one financial year as well as another, as well as production of the current financial year as well. So that's played a part in terms of the demands on the team with those, and the whole point of the audit market reset was to alleviate that and actually almost reset where you're going from 24-25 financial year going forward in terms of how we propose to deal with that. So there's an element around demand within there. I think the capacity's been a mixture of, you get levers at time to time within the team. You sometimes lose knowledge transfer within that process, and I think one of the things we've talked about with the audit committee has been around making sure that we've got robust sort of resilience and guardrails in with the teams and the level of capacity in there to accommodate any shocks to that system. So one of the things we're looking at in the medium term plan is to make sure that it's not just a resource for the now, it's a resource for the future with that future resilience as well. So that they were the multiple factors really that create issues within the team.
And can I just ask how that's going?
I think at the minute from the interim resource, we've secured interim resource as recently as the last couple of weeks in terms of immediately available interim resources with quite a lot of experience in public sector finance expertise, which has been good. We've got a new starter starting this week, we've got another new starter starting at the beginning of July, and then we've got another permanent resource starting in a couple of months. They work their notice, obviously, as a permanent resource in terms of that. And in terms of the actual review work, I've already engaged with the MCA, that's the Mayoral Combined Authority FDs. I'm going to do some benchmarking work that will be helpful for part of the medium-term piece of work around the future relative size of teams, and I've also started conversations with the FDs locally here around resourcing and support and how that might work, which they're having to think about and coming back to me with some ideas about that as well.
And that'll all help with the future proof.
That's right,
to,
yeah.
to ensure that
Yeah.
this won't be a problem.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, Brenda, I think we've got the resource we need now to address the immediate challenges, but we absolutely need, in parallel to that, to think about what we need going forward, so that we've got, as I say, a sustainable finance function that means this never happens again, and that's equally as big a priority as sorting what we need to do in the short term as well.
Can I push a little bit more operationally on that, Tom, that answer then? So when you say, what triggered the best value in terms of the capacity, so what percentage increase have we had in terms of that capacity, or how many more officers are actually disposable before and after on the value notice?
Yeah, so if you look at the resources I've just mentioned, a couple of the interviews and the ones that are in the report as new starters, the size of the baseline of the team is 15 FTE, you'll have seen it within the report, and you're talking about 4 new starters. We've had a couple of leavers as well, so the net is 4, an uplift with these new starters that are coming in as well as we speak, which 4 is a proportion of the 15, basically, that you've got. So to give you an idea of relative sort of
It's
size.
25%.
And that indication, have you had an indication from the auditors that would be suffice in terms of the recommendation, or?
So the auditors have reviewed the plan and the resourcing, and their feedback to me was this looks like a robust plan, and they were pleased with it. I mean, they're never ever definitive with these things. It's that yes, that looks like a plan that would work, and the resource plan's there, and it's just a case of we need to go through the work with them in the audit each year. So they've never, their view's positive in terms of the plan. Yeah.
I think as well, Alex, so Gary and the team are obviously in touch with the auditor regularly, but I'm now speaking to the chief auditor on a weekly basis, so we've got a really robust programme, but if anything happens that means we start to deviate off that, we'll act on it immediately. So as I say, I'm in weekly contact with that chief auditor.
Can I just ask, Gary, you're talking about speaking to the FDs of other combined authorities as well. Have we ever done any benchmarking exercises before on what the kind of capacity should be? So I appreciate the auditors are kind of saying that it's a robust plan, but to some extent, oddly, it may or may not be within their expertise, whether we should be looking at other combined authorities of relative size and responsibility and what their teams are, or whether we can even benchmark, which is much more difficult, I suspect, against local authorities that have a much wider remit. How have we ever done that before, firstly?
No, the benchmark with MCA, I mean the MCFDs, I asked that question as well, even predating my time here, and they said they hadn't really done the benchmarking exercise on that in their time, and some of them have been around longer than me.
So how do we know, and I appreciate, the auditors are saying from what they've seen that's a robust plan. Adding on to Alex's point, how do we know that's right when we haven't done that benchmarking exercise, or is the benchmarking exercise almost part of that homework to make sure, how does that fit in? You kind of submitted something or suggested a recommendation where we don't, as of today, don't necessarily have the evidence to back that up, and the benchmarking that goes along with it.
So there's 2 elements. The auditor's work was on, in terms of hitting this year end's timetable and what we're talking about, we've gone through quite a finite amount of detail about resources allocated to tasks within the plan and who's doing what and how that's going to work and the resilience within that plan, including the new starts. So they're saying that looks like a robust plan to hit this year end. They know we've got to do the medium term piece of work around the future capacity in the medium to long term of the finance team, and that requires the benchmarking, so they're aware of that and they're happy with that, that's a 2-stage process that's within this set out in the paper.
And then a really basic question. You set out in Appendix 2A, in effect, a series of meetings.
Yeah.
I appreciate it's extremely early. I assume we've already had the meetings on the 7th and they've been delivered on time.
Yeah.
And we've got meetings, what's the 13th today, so there are a set of meetings taking place tomorrow. So you've started on the right foot.
Yes.
You're meeting, in effect, what you've set out to them already.
Yeah.
Because I appreciate a couple of these meetings predate, in effect, this meeting.
That's right, yeah, but yes, I can confirm we had those meetings, yeah.
Chris?
So, I understand what's being said around the updates to cabinet stuff, but I'd be quite interested to make sure that we know what that update looks like. So for me, Appendix 2, where we have the sort of recommendations and the key tasks and milestones is really important, and actually that's a bit of what you'd expect to see. What sort of isn't as good is the way that it's ranked. So I would assume rank for progress, but actually if you start reading through all the descriptions, they're ranked based on risk and progress at different points. So my suggestion would be that you separate out those so that we are aware of the ones that are high risk, but we're also aware of
Direction of
progress
travel.
on this other separate route.
That's fine.
And then also direction of travel. So if something isn't going right, but
Yeah.
without us then having to go back and check the previous meeting, we're able to sort of see a good key of like up or down basic arrows.
We can do that, yeah.
And then it does feel like it'll then be a bit easier to track all of that, because that probably needs to be built into a framework which will be developed later on, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But for now,
Okay.
strongly suggest that we use that.
Yeah, we can do exactly that, yeah.
Can that be done immediately after this meeting and then circulated to?
Yeah, it won't take long to
So
do.
they can have that separated out. Sorry, Brenda, did you have your hand up?
I did, but I think Mike was doing.
Do you mind, Brenda, I'll go to you first and then I'll come to Mike. Yeah.
Just the colour coding. Until something's done, should it be green?
So the activities that are in there with the dates that have elapsed, they're completed with those transaction areas. But then there's a direction of travel on a couple of them. To answer your question, the green is it's Chris's point really, is part of it is around the status and the other part is direction of travel as well. So we feel comfortable, and with the auditors and the work we've done, that is green in terms of where we're going to end up with it, in terms of delivering that action. So we're trying to say the culmination of all that is we're confident that's on track.
Yeah, because your rank rating is a combination of those two things. I think we've heard twice here that separating those out will just give clarity to
Yeah.
you.
Just to further clarify that point, send it home, I think what we would generally do is we'd mark complete as blue, and then we'd have a list of sort of a sign up to remove them entirely from the list. So once they've been complete and we're satisfied with complete, we then remove them entirely from the list, so we weren't then monitoring them, because there'd been a sign up process to say that they were done. And that would then just, it would start short the list and then can really focus on what's important, where it's at.
I think, to be fair, I mean, something that is going to finish in November is green, and I just, you know, it could be still on the list for
Yeah.
completion, but I think Chris's point is.
Yeah, we can pick that up, yeah.
And I think just to get that right, if you do that after this, assuming that people are happy with the way forward, then I think it would be helpful to touch base. I think in this particular instance with Chris and Brenda, just to make sure that what you think they're saying is actually captured, rather than us going around the circle a couple of times. It'd just be helpful if you could just, even a Teams call or something, just to kind of run through what the breakdown of those two are around the kind of the blue and the taking off process. Because otherwise you'll produce something that it may be that you misunderstanding what's being said. You've got enough on your plate to have it go around that circle a few times. Sorry, Mike.
Be very helpful, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm really technical in the local authority point of the capacity point and benchmarking. Notwithstanding the fact that
failed on the first technical hurdle there. So the point I was going to make is that in terms of whilst the complexity of the work that's done within a local authority is slightly different to a combined authority in terms of the range of services, social care, those types of areas, there are industry averages around things like HR, legal, sit for benchmarking, which you could get hold of in terms of per head of the, per spend, for example, per head of staff, those types of things, which you could do like for like with industry average, so whether that be local authority, the NHS or the public bodies. I just wonder whether, because I know Cabinet members have asked that question about capacity, whether we extend the benchmarking further than just MCAs and use some of that industry average data, because that does exist.
Yeah. I mean, we did intend to we're using the benchmarking quite broadly in terms of the report, so we would be looking at local authorities as well. It's just we felt we needed to look at the MCAs as well in terms of relative sort of services, provision, complexity. Those, yeah.
Nuances to that, Gareth. What I make is there's nuances, but then standard things like, for example, spans of management tiers, numbers of FTEs per £1 million, for example. That stuff needs to be mixed in with the rich nuancing of that, in that, you know, there are different elements of MCA to other public bodies.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
and I'll be definitely engaging with the FTs in terms of what we're finding from that anyway, in terms of post, but I appreciate that, yeah, thanks.
Alec?
Just on the capability review, when do you think that piece of work will be completed, Gary?
We're thinking it may take, including the benchmark, in a couple of months to do that. So we're looking to work through that. Obviously, immediately I can run it in parallel because I can drive a lot of that while the team completing the year end and update me on the year end, so we can sort of parallel run it. So it's not that it doesn't need doesn't need to wait to commence till we've done the year end. It can be happening now, and I've already engaged some of the work on that in terms
Well,
of
I
activity.
don't want to give you more work, but will that come back to us as a report then on?
I can do that, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right, I've just given you more work, sorry Gary.
No, it's fine.
But he's doing it anyway.
It's a really it's important. I don't mind that. Yeah.
ChatGPT will write that report for you, Gary.
Might struggle with it.
Brian, did you?
Yeah, it's the same point about capacity and capability. And are there any capability gaps that have been identified that will need to be addressed?
I think when I referred to some of the leavers and starters, you know, depending on who leaves and who starts, it can have a bearing on that. So, for example, if you lose a person with a lot of public sector finance experience, that can create an issue. So what we've overtly done and already delivered on some of that is we've recruited in public sector finance expertise as well as the commercial finance expertise we've already got in the team. So we're already working on that. It's a good point, and the blend has to be right with that. So you can cover the nature of what we do as an MCA covers a lot of commercial activity as well as public sector finance expertise as well.
Just to check with what you say, sorry Brendan, if you don't mind, just to check with what you're saying, just so we're all on the same page. What you're saying is, in the immediate term, to get through this process with the auditors, the team's in place, right?
Yeah.
So around capability and
Yes.
capacity,
Yeah.
on the basis that what you've shown the auditors is correct, and they say that that's a robust process, and we need to make sure that we continue to scrutinise that to make sure that you meet those benchmarks and those timelines throughout that process. One of the things that's come up a couple of times, I suppose outside of this forum, but I think it touches upon the point that a number of people have made around capacity and capability. As part of the benchmarking exercise, yes, we're looking at, again in simplistic terms, in an optimal way, what should the team look like?
Yeah.
But as part of that, are you leaving all options on the table as part of the exercise? Because one thing having benchmarking, but what are you benchmarking against as an optimal team? And that sounds to me like an internal process. So for example, if you were looking at the full breadth of options, you'd be looking at optimisation of delivery of the medium and long-term financial goals from a capability and capacity point of view. Now for me that would include the recruitment of the right expertise in the right area, but are we also looking at all options which may include outsourcing?
Yeah, and we actually have a blend now of in-house, and we commission in expertise on professional services for particular projects.
But even on the public sector side though?
Yeah, so one of the things that we were asked to look at when we've touched on it with the LGA and other colleagues is to consider all of those things, so to work out how that would operate. So I envisage with the benchmarking and the work that we do, we'll get into that in terms of, okay, that's telling us certain things, but then we need to look at the options appraisal of what that looks like.
That's
for
my
the
point.
solution.
So at some point will there be an options appraisal that comes back here that will show, in at one end of the system, we need to recruit X number of people in these areas to build a robust team for the long term, right the way through to the other end of the spectrum, which is, well, one of the options actually is we could have almost a kind of a skeleton team here, but we might outsource our finance function either to a third party or potentially to a local authority. I mean, is that being considered as an option? Because it feels to me like we're going to do this exercise.
I've not ruled out anything based on
Right,
the
okay.
solution. Yeah, so it's more I want to get the facts and the information and work through that thoroughly, and then take the standards off FDs across both MCAs and local authorities and look at what that's telling us, and then work up and frame the options appraisal for that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
everything's on the table.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Mike, you were going to say something?
Yeah, sorry, just another technical point into that. I suppose the two things being talked about here is there's something about benchmarking capacity to say, do we currently or in the short term have the number of people in comparison to the MCAs? But I think the process that the cabinet members and the mayors just outlined is it's a workforce planning exercise, isn't it? Which is, have we got the gaps? Do we know where the gaps are going to be in the medium to long term? And then how do you fill the gaps as a framework that you can follow through the LGA to do that? So I would ask the LGA, and the reason I know is we've just had a workshop back at the ranch on the same issue, but some of that option might be, do you have shared services, do you have outsourcing, do you recruit more people, actually do you need more apprenticeships in this area long term? That's a workforce planning action for the combined authority, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Mike, and we're talking about finance now, but I think as part of the organisational development we're doing with the best value as well, it's about looking at resource across everything that we do and the expertise that sits across all six of us and how we maximise that to greatest effect across everything we're doing. So I think it's part of a much wider piece of work, so I 100% agree.
Brendan?
So I just wondered if you did any in-house training,
Yes.
apprenticeships?
Yeah. we have a combination of different levels of resource. I think I've tried to set out in the baseline information within the paper the level of the way the accountancy profession works, fully qualified chartered accountants, accounting technicians, apprentices, those different levels within the team, and how that operates. We support a lot of training within the team to help them get through those qualifications, as well as the people who are already qualified with a lot of post-qualification experience as well.
How many trainees you have at the moment?
So at the moment, and going through training at the accounting technician level, we have 2 people going through that training at accounting technician.
Will
But
that, do you think, help with the future proof?
well, it's something that helps with the future proofing and succession planning within it, because you've got a natural progression through accountancy as a profession in terms of technicians and chartered accountants and how you work. It's how I came through the profession in terms of it and working through those. So I'm very familiar with that as a sort of an approach to take with finance teams. Yeah.
Just following on from Tom, I absolutely agree. I mean, a couple of meetings ago, we had a lengthy debate about public questions, didn't we? And the resource that takes to answer them. And I'm assuming a lot of them are based around finance, so it's about getting the public inspection bit right as well. And are we going to go that extra mile to avoid that sort of capacity and being taken up and just answering sort of the public? And we've got an opportunity now to really head that off at the pass, haven't we, in terms of doing that piece of work. Just a little bit more on the previous capacity then. Just on what's gone on over the last year or two with the reputational stuff and the recommendations. What, have we lost anything, any capacity from sickness and stress, mental health, would you say?
In the finance team, you mean?
Yeah.
The finance team, we haven't lost capacity through. I'm not saying they haven't had stress, it's because I think it's a relative term for each individual. But in terms of what we manage, we haven't lost sickness days through significant sickness days through that sort of explanation, because we do get the records on that, we get the information senior leaders on that. I think it doesn't mean to say it doesn't have a bearing on the team in terms of the pressures that they're managing, and we keep a careful eye on that from a welfare perspective with the team, and we have regular one-to-ones, etc., and conversations with them to make sure that's happening, in addition to the practical stuff like capacity, training, everything else that we're doing as well.
Okay, so just to push on the public inspection bit then, and so protecting future capacity, I know there's a few in the recommendations, but are we doing anything other than our statutory, what we need to do statutorily to take that extra mile to avoid any of this in the future?
Is that on a wider sort of governance approach to inspection of accounts,
Yeah.
public questions, things like
I mean, I would even rotate these meetings just so people from different five authorities could sit in the public gallery, because you know, the accessibility, it's always the same people in the public gallery, sorry folks. But if you could share more about these meetings around the 5 local authorities, you know, would be a step in the right direction to me. I know it's not particularly to this report, but I do believe that, and I've mentioned that a few times.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of specifics and resourcing and working on inspections, and you know, I think we try to provide our team availability. Obviously, we have to through the statutory inspection period, but beyond that, you've got FOIs, various other things that sometimes they're finance related, sometimes they're non-finance related. So in terms of the finance related ones, we try to get the team to fully respond to those and comply with the FOI process.
I would imagine the vast majority of them are finance related.
There's a lot, but there are non-financial ones as well. I
was going to say, I think there's some statutory requirements around obviously how you publish your accounts, but I think your wider point, Alec, is probably something we need to think about in terms of the best value workshops and plans and how we're working as an organisation in terms of that reset. So I think we can take that away.
I mean, I think we've got a lot of things right in the past. Just think, you know, moving forward, how we can maybe tweak that culture in terms of, you know, working in public as best we possibly can, especially when it's a recommendation from the auditors, you know.
Chris?
I think one of the things that sort of concerns me a bit is that there wasn't really an early warning about it. So, in the same way that I don't really see, when we talk about sort of portfolios and we talk about the reports, a lot of them are based on the delivery outcomes of the organisation, and actually probably needs to be a bit more on actually the running and the organisation as a whole. So actually, your role, Gary, which politician is aligned to that, and actually finance and governance, do we know for definite where that sits as a delegation, and what reports are we doing about that? Because as well as trying to work out what happens in the Tees Valley, we also need to make sure that the actual organisation itself has some oversight that the report's brought about, making sure that there is a recruitment and retention policy that's fit for purpose. And it's all those sort of internal things which probably need a bit more of a light shone.
Certainly some of the conversations we've been having linked to the best value notice around portfolios and the spread of portfolios. They don't necessarily have to stay the same as they've been before in terms of, which I think you're alluding to there, in terms of the portfolio rates of finance and resources, for example.
Yeah.
Actually, at the minute, our portfolios are linked to the thematics of the investment plan areas.
I think that's one of the themes that's come out, Chris, in terms of the workshops we've had today around the role of portfolio holders, what the portfolios are, what that means. I think, again, that's something we need to take away and pick up as part of that organisational development work.
As part of the review of our governance structure, we need to look at how we can do things that it's less reactive, so more proactive. So perhaps some combined authority have an employment committee, for example, so it's looking at what we can have in place that we can effectively roll out to deal with issues rather than reacting to things as and when they change. So I think we need to look at how we structure our governance processes to sort of deal with that more effectively, perhaps, and that will be dealt with as part of the best value notice.
Last one. Does the public inspection, does that carry itself to the Development Corporation finances as well, the recommendation? Or?
The Development Corporations are public bodies, they're subject to public inspection.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but are they direct, these recommendations, are they solely towards the TVCA?
Those recommendations are recommendation letters to those charged with governance, i.e. yourselves, in terms of TVCA, but the reference in those letters is to we expect to receive equivalent letters for the 3 development corporations as well.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Anything you want to add, Tom? Okay. Anything you want to add, Gary? Before we...
I think just to the recommendations to
Yeah, no. Okay, on that basis, are people happy to read Gary's recommendations and note the letter from the auditor? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Is there anything else you're going to pick up, just as specific action with Chris and Brenda on the RAC rating system? I think that would be helpful if you take a pass at it and then have a little look at it to make sure it's what you were expecting, Chris and Brenda, and then we'll pick it up from there. And then when will the next update on this come back to us?
So we have scheduled at the end of this month, we're going to do a written update and briefings within the paper at the end of May, and we'll circulate that to the Cabinet.
What is the process for Cabinet? Okay, they get that written update, but what's the process for Cabinet to engage or respond or get involved with that?
We would be sorry, Tom, don't put the question.
And I was just going to say, I think we'd keep it as a standing item on here. We'd keep it as a standing item on all of our informal meetings. And then I think as every briefing goes out, there'll be an opportunity if people want to get together and have a conversation about anything in there, probably on an exception basis, but we can be as open as we need to be as members want in terms of discussions.
Okay, I think if we can figure out and communicate to the local authorities what that process is, okay, it might be by exception, but what the process is once they receive a written update, who do they contact, how do they contact them, what forum can that be in for them on an individual basis or a collective basis, to have more engagement on that written feedback. Because the last thing we want is for it to feel like a transmission from us, and that we get further down the line to a future meeting and there are things that people wanted to raise in the interim that could have further accelerated the change in the interim period. Does that make sense? So can you take that away as well and just help flesh out the process in which local authorities can engage with that written update if they've got any concerns or questions?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming in for this. Enjoy the rest of your day.